the stream, but it's weird. Go ahead, run to the...
Welcome back, everyone. We'll just wait until we've confirmed that we're live streaming. And if you're able to just click on the little camera icon, we'll keep our cameras off just so the audio quality is better. I'm going to turn mine off now. As soon as we're live streaming, we'll get it started. I'll just wait for that confirmation. Okay, I believe we're ready to get started. Okay, if you can turn off your microphone or your Microsoft Teams microphone. Thank you, Mr. Director. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Welcome, everyone. It is Monday, April the 19th, 2021 for our board meeting. This is Trustee Don Danko chairing, and I'll start with our land acknowledgement. The Hamilton Wentworth District School Board acknowledges our presence on ancestral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee Confederacy land as determined by the Dish with One Spoon Treaty. The intent of this agreement is for all nations sharing this territory to do so responsibly, respectfully, and sustainably in perpetuity. We respect the long-standing relationships with the local Indigenous communities, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and the Six Nations of the Grand River. At this time, we will play O Canada. Thank you. Moving to item 3, we'll do our meeting roll call. Is Trustee Archer present? Don't believe so. Trustee Bingham?
Present.
Thank you. Trustee Buck?
Present.
Thank you. Trustee Dees?
Present.
Thank you. Trustee Galindo?
Present.
Thank you. Trustee Johnstone? Trustee Johnstone? Not hearing anything, but it looks like you're in the meeting. If you're, okay, having trouble unmuting, we'll figure that out. Trustee Miller?
Present. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Mulholland?
Present.
Thank you. Trustee Paikin Miller?
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. Trustee Tutt? Trustee Tutt? I can hear.
Present.
Oh, thank you. Okay, Student Trustee Hessler?
Present.
Thank you. Student Trustee Zakar?
Present.
Thank you. And Segawanagalawa.Segi. I believe we have regrets, but I just want to check. Okay, I believe we had regrets from Segawanagalawa.Segi. Thank you, everyone. And Trustee Officer Miller, if you can support Trustee Johnstone with figuring out how to unmute, I believe it's via phone. So this evening we'll move along to approval of the agenda. I'll have that, and I'll just remind everyone for virtual meeting norms, we are on Teams this evening due to some issues with some phone companies. On Teams, if we can use our virtual hand up, that would be helpful. If you have trouble with the hand up, then you can unmute yourself to let me know if you'd like to go on the speakers list. Please keep yourself on mute if you're not speaking, and we'll keep our cameras off for audio quality as well. So I will assign people to move and second. If for some reason you're not comfortable with moving or seconding something that I've assigned you to, please just let me know and I can change that. For approval of the agenda, I'll have Trustee Bingham move that, seconded by Trustee Buck. Are there any amendments to the agenda? Seeing none, is anyone opposed to approving the agenda? Seeing none, thank you. Item 5 is declarations of conflict of interest. I'll note I haven't received any in writing. Are there any declarations of conflict of interest for this evening? Seeing none. Item 6 is confirmation of the minutes from March 15th, 29th, and April 6th. Are there any corrections to the minutes? Okay, hearing none. Item 7 is correspondence. We have correspondence with respect to the external investigation regarding bell times, regarding the Rosedale Capital's priority, or being on the Capital's priority list, and correspondence from a school board regarding remote learning. So I would be looking for a motion to receive and file. And if I could assign Trustee Deeth as the mover and Trustee Galindo as the seconder for receiving and filing. Are there any questions or comments from trustees? I'll just add myself to the speakers list and note that it may be beneficial to refer the letter from the Rosedale Home School Association and School Council to Finance and Facilities as well. So I will look to, I think, amend the motion so that we receive and file all items and refer item C to Finance and Facilities. And then I'm also just going to note that we have additional information about remote learning and the impact on special education students coming later this evening through our Special Education Advisory Committee report. And I'm hoping that trustees might consider the correspondence we've received and what we'll talk about later and look at an opportunity to make sure that we share our input and feedback to the ministry around remote learning. And I just want to check Trustee Johnstone, did you figure out how to unmute? And I'm just getting a text saying that you cannot. I think Trustee Officer Miller, can you remind us what you have to hit to unmute?
Thank you, and through the chair, she's not calling in via her cell phone. She's using the Microsoft Teams app, and it's having some challenges with microphones. So I've given her some suggestions on text.
Okay, and if you wanted Trustee Johnstone it is a system issue from what we can understand, so you could put it in the meeting chat if you had something you wanted to ask or add, or possibly try leaving and coming back into the meeting. We will have an opportunity to sort of revisit the item of remote learning and what that means for students in a later item on the report. So if there aren't any further questions or comments, then I would look to see, sorry, Trustee Miller, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I did want to make a quick comment. I know that we will be discussing this later on as the chair has described, but I'm very concerned with this idea, and I think the Rainbow School Board, Rainbow District School Board, for sending this and forwarding it to us. I think I would like to echo a lot of what has been captured in this letter, but first and foremost, I'm really concerned at the ministry inclination to hammer through such a wide and multi-layered change at the policy level for something as integral as how we deliver our education to our students. I think it is very troubling that the ministry is looking to implement these changes in the middle of a pandemic, when we still don't know, we don't really have the data on how well remote learning is working for all of our families. We don't really know the equity issues around this, and we don't know any, as far as I can tell, any real specific plan from the ministry to ensure that the education being developed is being done in accordance with the standard we expect from the educators we employ and support all year long. So I very much, I thank Rainbow District School Board for highlighting this, but I'm hopeful that it is going to be an ongoing conversation, because this cannot just be a direction from the ministry without input from school boards across the province. This is far too important, and I'm cautiously hopeful that the ministry would be taking consultation from us, from our school boards, from the people who know how to provide and deliver education in the best way. But I'm very concerned that this is not what's happening here, and that we are essentially bulldozing a plan that has not been, reviewed, has not been developed appropriately. And it really highlights concerns. I do also want to highlight that I commend the variety of letters that we have in front of us today. Thank you very much to, a multitude of community members who continue to send in correspondence, continue to voice their concerns for issues that they find, very serious. Bell times, the external investigations, all of those things are very, very real for all of our communities. And I do appreciate the work that goes into these letters, and that our community feels that they can speak to us. So I'm hopeful that we can continue to listen. So thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Miller. Trustee Johnstone, are you able to unmute now?
I am, thank you.
Go ahead.
Speaking to the correspondence that we received from with regards to the move towards a permanent online learning or synchronous learning model, I just want to echo some of the comments I heard from my colleague, as well as school boards across the province. I'm aware that TDSB has also, their Board of Trustees has also written a letter, as well as OPSBA and other school boards. I think some of the concerns here is noted both in the letter as well as by my colleagues is the concern that we not only do we not have evidence over the success of remote learning, but what evidence does exist out there is that in-person learning is paramount. It is by far has the greatest impact on student learning and achievement, and it also has the greatest positive impact on student mental health and well-being. What has been shared publicly with parents and with the community has been a leak through the National Post. I think that parents deserve details on what the government is considering so that parents, staff, as well as students themselves can have input into what these plans are. I also share very serious concerns that the government's looking to move to implement plans for September 2021 without having data collected and without a full consultation. And I think that when we're looking at these models, what needs to be first and foremost is student learning and achievement. What is going to have the greatest positive impact? And in fact, I would argue that what we need to see is a recovery approach. Many of our students and families have talked about the struggle of online learning. They've talked about how they feel, many families feel that that their students will require more support when they do return. So I think investing in synchronous learning or online learning is actually in a way that is rushed for September 2021, moves away from what we need to be doing, which is looking at providing students with more supports, getting them directly connected to their local schools in a way that is properly funded. So I'll leave it at that, but I'm also hoping that that we'll write a letter to the minister highlighting these concerns and highlighting that as we move forward through education, it needs to be grounded in the research and pedagogy of what actually works best, and that's in person. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further comments or questions from trustees? Trustee Deeth?
Thank you. I just, through the chair, I just want to echo, what's being said, and I think at this time, rushing ahead with this, when something that Trustee Johnstone mentioned in that we need to be in, how we're going to recover from this, how we're going to get students connected again as we, come out of this. It should be more of a priority than the pushing forward the remote learning. And I think waiting a year would be beneficial to make sure that we do have all the proper information, proper data, proper research, and all the proper techniques and support in place for all our learners. So we should be adding our voice to this and including a letter as well. So I don't know whether this is where or but I will say that a letter needs to be written to support some of the other boards, NOPSBA and other groups as well. You will see in SEAC that they want to address it as well. So I think it's important we add our name to the list. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anything further? Seeing none, so to the motion to receive and file all items and refer item C to Finance and Facilities, is anyone opposed? And then I've heard from several trustees and would feel this way myself, that there's a desire to write a letter to the ministry expressing concerns around the proposal for permanent remote learning, timelines for it, looking for an opportunity to consult and possibly provide feedback. Would trustees like to just look at moving that now, or do we want to wait until we also see the Special Education Advisory Committee report, noting if we move to write a letter now, we can also comment on anything that needs to be added to it at a later time? Trustee Deeth?
Oh, I'm happy to make that motion. Thank you.
Okay, Trustee Deeth, and seconded, I had Trustee Miller and Trustee Johnson. We'll do Trustee Miller. Thank you. So to the motion to write a letter to the ministry, and of course, I thank people for expressing their comments and concerns. Would anyone like to speak to the motion or comment further? Seeing none, Trustee Miller, did you want to comment further?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and I apologize for the delay there. I just actually had a question for clarification. I'm in full support of adding, frankly, our dissent on this issue to both the public discourse, but I do think it's appropriate for us to formally state our concerns at the provincial level. But I did want to just ask, I know that we do write a lot of letters. We've had a lot of very serious issues come up, particularly within the context of COVID-19 and the last year or so. So I know our advocacy generally is a bit of a difficult situation. So I'm just wondering if, and perhaps this is a question for staff or for even our legal team, maybe we can receive an answer later. It doesn't need to be this evening right now. But I wonder if it's possible to inquire as to what our other options are in addition to a letter. Is there any other avenue for us to express our issues with this, our resistance to this, our concern for how a rollout is going to happen? That's just sort of a question, but generally, yes, of course, I'm 100% in support of the letter as a first step, but I would very much love clarity from either staff or from conversations with the minister himself around what exactly is happening here and how we as school boards can best advocate. Thank you.
Thank you. And of course, we can include OBSPA on our communication, and of course can work through our trustee association to advocate, as that's one of their critical roles. But I'll turn to the director to see if there are other options that we have available to us.
Thank you. Through the chair, I'm just confirming you can hear me well.
Yes, we can.
So to Trustee Miller's question, I think the most powerful way for this to be heard, not only through the board, but through the voice of constituents. One of the challenges I know Code has spoken about is that this is not been public, yet part of it has leaked to the Toronto media, but all the specific details, people who did meet around the table did sign a non-disclosure piece. So I think the most important piece is what already is public, and how do we have, how does the school board, the Hamilton School Board, make sure that the parents are aware and can voice their concern through the Board of Trustees. I think that's the most powerful way right now, as we're understanding that the ministry is still in the consulting mode, we're being told, and that that consultation will then reflect a policy change or not a policy change. So in terms of options, it's through the voice of school board trustees and the more powerful voices through our parent groups is critical at this point in time. Through the chair.
Thank you. Trustee Miller?
No, thank you. I appreciate the comments from the director.
Thank you. And I don't see anyone else on the speakers list. Please unmute yourself if I've missed you. I just will add a comment that we have been talking to our union partners also about what their perspective is on the possibility of permanent remote learning, and I believe there's an opportunity for our board, once we have penned this letter and identified concerns from a trustee perspective, to work with our union partners, with our staff, and possibly come out with a joint public statement that reinforces the concerns and what we'd be looking for when it comes to the model of education that we deliver. So that's certainly an opportunity as well that would not require an additional motion. At this time, is anyone opposed to penning a letter to the ministry, including OBSPA, regarding the concerns around the proposal for permanent remote learning? Okay, seeing none, thank you, trustees. We'll move on to reports from trustee special committees, starting with our governance committee. And Trustee Tutt, would you mind bringing forward the report? I recognize that I chaired that meeting, but if you're comfortable, that would be great.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Happy to bring forward the committee report from the governance committee that was held on March 22nd, 2021. There were 3 items on the agenda that night. There was an action item, monitoring item, and it appears like there was a review that was discussed. Specifically with regards to an action item, the trustees' code of conduct was discussed, specifically looking at the appointment of, or possible appointment of, outside consultant. There seems to be a provision in the board's trustee code of conduct where there's an option for an outside consultant to conduct a formal code of conduct inquiry. That was discussed, and should a code of conduct come forward, which requires the appointment of an integrity commissioner, the process will be followed as outlined in the governance procedures, which is also encapsulated in the trustee code of conduct. On that topic, a motion was brought forward by Trustee Galindo. It was recommended that should the chair and vice chair request the director of education to appoint an outside consultant to complete the undertaking of a formal code of conduct inquiry, every effort will be made first to request that the work be completed by an integrity commissioner, and in that case, that it is not possible, another consultant will be appointed. That motion was carried. With regards to the monitoring item, the trustee annual plan and self-evaluation development was discussed. Trustee Danko noted for the committee that the Board of Trustees has worked to fulfill their responsibility under the Education Act, specifically Part 6, which including promoting student achievement and well-being through a multi-year strategic plan. The Board of Trustees has an annual committee work plan that ensures effective reporting, policy review and development, as well as monitoring and evaluating the performance of the Director of Education, which is under Education Act Section 169-1. There are opportunities for the Board of Trustees to further focus and reflect to improve collective effectiveness of the board going forward and to meet the requirement of an annual review of effectiveness per the board bylaws. Upon consultation and review of the practices at other Ontario public school boards, there is no specific framework for a board self-evaluation. However, the Toronto District School Board has engaged a consultant to develop a self-evaluation tool that is expected to be shared in the coming months. It is recommended that the Hamilton-Wentworth District School Board trustees leverage the work of the TDSB, review the self-evaluative tool, as well as the process followed to establish the tool when it is publicly available. The proposed framework appears to be in 5 sections or 5 items. One is being self-reflection. The governance committee shall request all trustees engage in the self-reflection exercise with respect to key foundational knowledge, effectiveness, and satisfaction with the work as a trustee. 2, goal setting. The governance committee shall establish key areas for goal setting that align with trustee responsibility under the Education Act, the Hamilton Wentworth District School Board Trustee Handbook, and the HWDSB strategic directions. As well, the governance committee, with feedback from all trustees, shall recommend specific, measurable, achievable goals for the Board of Trustees. Goals should focus on specific work as it relates to trustees and board effectiveness. Item 3, action planning. The governance committee shall recommend or highlight specific actions that will support the goals of the Board of Trustees. B, timelines or targets should be set in collaboration with staff, where staff support is required to meet those goals. Item 4, assessment planning. The governance committee shall recommend measurements of success with respect to the specific goals for the Board of Trustees. B, governance committee shall review and make a recommendation with respect to evaluation tools developed by their organizations or board. And lastly, 5, annual reporting. The governance committee shall support the chair in developing an annual report for the Board of Trustees' annual plan and self-evaluation. The annual report will be posted publicly on the HWDSB website. As well, a trustee subcommittee will be created to assist Chair Danko in further development of the framework and will be presented to a future governance committee meeting for further discussion. Trustees are encouraged to connect directly with Trustee Danko regarding feedback or participation on the subcommittee. The last item that was covered is the governance review update. Staff provided a presentation on governance review presented at the last governance meeting, noting that the feedback received from committee members will be incorporated into a document that staff are working on. Staff continue to work through the procurement process related to governance review, and once the third-party consultant has been hired, an updated timeline will be provided to the committee. That concludes my remarks on the report, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Tutt. So moving to approve the report, I'll have Trustee Johnstone second that. And are there any questions or comments to the report? Trustee Deeth?
Thank you. And through the chair, so my first comment or question is in regards to the appointment of outside consultant. Do we know the difference in cost between an integrity commissioner and a third-party consultant? Is there quite a difference in the cost?
Thank you. I'll turn to the director.
Through the chair, at this point in time, I do not know the cost difference. It also varies on the scope of the investigation. And currently, right now, we are we have part of a request for proposal with other school boards looking at creating a list of integrity commissioners that we could use when required. But at this point in time, I do not have the specific costs. Through the chair.
Thank you. Trustee Deeth?
Thank you. And as we develop this, can we also make sure that if we do assign a budget to it, when we do use an integrity commissioner or a third-party consultant, that it comes back to us should it look like the cost is starting to escalate?
So through the chair, we can certainly take that away. What I'll say to Trustee Deeth is that the challenge becomes not just a trustee code of conduct investigation, but any investigation. There is typically a budget assigned, but once the investigation begins, and this happens sometimes even with labor investigations, until they begin, sometimes you don't know what other areas or further inquiry or investigation needs to be done once the investigator begins interviewing potential witnesses. So, but I will take that away so we can at least think about a budget framework for any future code of conduct. So we'll take that away and learn more once we have the actual integrity commissioner list finalized, and then we'll take that away as an update to the board and governance once that's completed. So through the chair.
Thank you. Any follow-up, Trustee Dees?
Thank you. I do have, sorry, that's it for that. So thank you for those, for that and for taking that away. My other comment is in regards to the monitoring item B, the trustee annual plan and self-evaluation development. Would this be something that we would reach out to OBSPA, because it sounds like only the Toronto board is looking at doing this, and you know, it's great to you know, if they'll share what they're learning with us, but this, it feels like something that OBSPA should be involved in. Is this something that would align with that work through the chair?
Thank you, Trustee Dees. I'll answer that from an initial investigative perspective that I've done. I have reached out to OBSPA. This is not something that they currently support, but I think as we work through this process and we learn from TDSB, they may be open to an opportunity to support this work for boards. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you. I just, you know, I think this is something that, you know, is important, you know, is important work. And you know, in supporting the work that trustees do and supporting trustees. So I'm hoping that down the road that OBSPA would get involved in this, maybe in developing a template. So anyway, thank you. That's it.
Thank you. Is there anything further from trustees or student trustees? Trustee Miller?
Thank you. And through the chair, I just wanted to ask a quick clarification. So just so trustees around the table are clear, the integrity commissioner would be essentially hired on a case-by-case basis for code of conduct, for investigations on breaches of the code of conduct for individual trustees, whereas the third-party consultant is, I believe, who we are looking to hire for our full governance review. So that's that came out of the work that we passed last fall, where we said we wanted to review our governance structure from an ARAO framework, and that we were looking to have a third-party investigator do that work. So that's the way that I understood it as a member of the committee, but I just wanted to make it clear for other trustees who are not on the committee that the integrity commissioner would be handling actual code of conduct complaints, and the third-party consultant would be reviewing all of our governance bylaws, essentially. So if I'm wrong, correct me, but I believe that distinction should be made clear here as we're discussing the variety of work that we're talking about tonight.
Thank you, Trustee Miller. You are correct. I think one additional caveat is that in the event an integrity commissioner is not available to do a code of conduct inquiry that's been directed in that manner, then another outside consultant could be appointed as per the motion that we see before us. Is there anything further? I will just take this opportunity to invite any trustees who would like to be part of the subcommittee to work on the trustee self-evaluation framework and sort of work towards building opportunities for developing an action plan and reviewing the work of TDSB. Please let me know if you're interested by email, and we will start doing some informal meetings. This wouldn't be a formal committee of the board. With that, we have the approval of the report moved and seconded. Is anyone opposed? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Trustee Tutt and Mr. Hand.
Sorry, just a quick question, going back to item A, the trustee code of conduct, appointment of outside consultant. Just a point of clarification. I'm going to assume that there may be a an additional conversation at Governance Committee regarding any terms of reference when this outside Integrity Commissioner is appointed?
Sorry, can you just clarify, are you asking if there would be terms of reference or if it was discussed at the committee?
If that there would be terms of reference.
Okay, thank you. I'll turn to the director.
Through the chair, at this point in time, if an integrity commissioner was hired, we would provide them with the trustee code of conduct policy as the guide, because the motion, if approved, says once it is in a formal once it's gone to a formal code of conduct. So that is what we would provide them. In addition, when we do engage with an integrity commissioner, there would also be a contract as well for the work. But those would be the two items at this point in time that staff would be operationalizing. And through the chair, if there's something different, then open to listening what that would be through the chair.
Thank you. Trustee Tutt?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate that feedback from the director. The question, or I guess the concern that I have is that I think a discussion needs to be had with regards to the parameter and the scope of whoever this person is in the office and authority that they're going to be able to dictate, seeing that they aren't trustees themselves, and they're going to be left to interpret that code of conduct. So I think a discussion needs to be had with regards to the parameter and the scope of their mandate. And once the decision has been made, some more clarity around that, clarity around their ability to report, who they'll be reporting to.
Thank you, Trustee Tutt. I will go back to the director as I believe at the committee when we discussed this, it was clear that when we delegate authority to an integrity commissioner, they can make recommendations to the Board of Trustees with respect to a code of conduct and with recommended actions, but I'll go to the director for some clarification.
So thank you through the chair. My interpretation is that an integrity commissioner may, after the investigation of a formal code of conduct, may determine first, A, if there's been a breach to a trustee code of conduct, if it's been substantiated or not. And then the second piece, they could then provide a recommendation to potential sanctions. However, the responsibility of, and the final decision, whether there's been a breach, first of all, and secondly, potential sanctions, still lies in the responsibility of the Board of Trustees. So that's what we would be recommending, that they provide that kind of detail, fact-finding, and recommendations, but ultimately the Board of Trustees then own the final decision through the chair.
Trustee Tutt, any follow-up?
Oh, thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you. And I'm not seeing anyone else on the speakers list. Do a quick check. So with that, is anyone opposed to approving the report for governance? Seeing none, thank you, that's approved. Next, we'll move along to item 9, which is our Audit Committee report, and I'll turn the chair over to the Vice Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You may now bring forward your report.
Thank you. The Audit Committee met on March 25th, 2021, and we just have monitoring items. There was an update on school board sector issues, including transportation. The Audit Committee was apprised of the bell time study that's been completed, and this reiterated that changes to bell times for both the Public and Catholic Board for September 2021 have been released to families as of March 25th. The changes resulted in 25 fewer bus runs, which improves the current bus driver shortage. They also learned that the 2021-22 budget planning is currently underway, and that we are expecting a reduced enrollment, so funding will be reduced and there will be reductions for September 2021. The Audit Committee learned that the actual grant amounts were projected to be shared sometime in April, and staff will be working with Executive Council and Finance and Facilities to look at ways to balance the budget. With that, I would like to move the report.
Thank you, Chair Danko. I'll turn to my colleagues to see if there are any questions before we turn to a vote. Not seeing any hands, I do need a seconder to receive the report on the motion of Trustee Danko. I'll look for, there we go, Trustee Miller. Thank you. Is anyone voting against receiving the report? Including trustees, I presume. Student trustees, I should say. Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously, and I'll turn the chair back to you.
Thank you. So moving on to item 10, we have our finance and facilities reports. We have two reports and we'll do these separately. So starting with the April 1st report, to Vice Chair Galindo, would you like to bring the report forward?
Yes, thank you, Chair Danko. So it's my pleasure to bring forward the Finance and Facilities Committee report from April 1st. There is an action item and a monitoring update. With the action item, the board recommends that the board approve the 2021-2022 accommodation strategy schedule. Now, as trustees may recall, in April of 2018, the Ministry of Education released a revised version of the pupil accommodation guidelines. And according to that, the next steps identified by the ministry are to implement the final revised versions of those guidelines in order to release the supporting steps. But the Ministry of Education is still developing those guidelines, and we are yet to receive further information on what that will look like. So because these templates have not been released as of April 1st of this month, and per direction from the Ministry of Education, all future accommodation reviews have not been scheduled at our board, but are identified on the schedule remaining. And the accommodation strategy itself recaps completed accommodation strategies from 2011, 2012, 2020, 2021, between those two periods, and outlines the remaining 3 planning areas that still need to be reviewed. And you'll see those attached as supporting documents to the report that correspond to the accommodation strategy schedules as it pertains to the long-term facilities master plan. So again, that recommended action item is that the board approve the accommodation strategy schedule for the upcoming school year. And then with regards to the monitoring item, staff provided an overview of the process to develop the preliminary budget and assumptions that we used. So we were given a bit of information on grants for student needs, which I'll expand on in the next update. We had a discussion about student enrollment, staffing, and other budgets for this budget development process. And with that, I move that report back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So moving to approve the report, since there is an action item, and I'll have Trustee Johnstone second that report. Are there any questions from trustees or student trustees? I'm not seeing any. Is anyone opposed to approving the report? Seeing none, that one is approved, and we'll move to the April 8th Finance and Facilities meeting. Over to Vice Chair Galindo.
Thank you, Chair Danko. Yes, so this is the Finance and Facilities Committee report from April 8th. There's also an action item here and a monitoring update. So speaking to the action item, we're recommending that the board approve the preliminary allocation of the following full-time equivalent positions for the purpose of the 2021-22 school-based staffing. And the breakdown is on the report itself. So for elementary teachers, we're looking at 2,042.1. Secondary teachers, we're looking at 909.7. Early childhood educators, we're looking at 245. Educational assistants, 654. Principals and vice principals, 155. School office administration, 196.5. And school custodial staff, 354.5. So with this action item, staff presented the report and indicated that they are recommending the approval of this action item in order to prepare for a smooth start to the upcoming school year, enabling staff to begin the process to ensure that collective agreement compliance takes place along with effective school-based staffing decisions. And this recommendation, of course, represents staff that is allocated to schools, not the system itself. in terms of those positions. Now, with regards to grants for student need funding, that information has yet to be released, and staff with this recommendation have been conservative in their staffing assumptions. Once funding is finalized and collective agreement timelines are being met, positions can then be added, but they can't be reduced based on the numbers that I just gave. So again, and then I'll speak to this in the monitoring item too. I just want to echo the fact that due to declining enrollment, the lack of information from the Ministry of Education, specifically with regards to they still haven't given us what our GSN information is going to look like, and the need for our board to meet collective agreement timelines. Moving forward with this decision, these numbers can only increase, meaning that at this point, this is a worst case scenario, which in my opinion would be unlikely at this point. Now, with regards to the budget development, staff presented additional information on the budget. They noted that enrollment is projected to be down by approximately 1,100 students this year. Thus, the school-based staffing recommendation above, based on the decrease in enrollment, this will result in a significant decrease in funding. There is also an increase in projected expenses that do not have a corresponding increase to projected revenue at this point. So using the projected enrollment and best information available with regards to the GSN, board staff have estimated that the revenue and the expenditures, when comparing the two, will result in a deficit of about 9 million at this time, which we need to make up for. Again, this is a conservative estimate, and we will be offered an update once GSN information is received and further budget decisions are made. So with that, I move this report and I pass it over to you, Chair Danko. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I go to a seconder, Trustee Johnstone, you had declared a conflict of interest in the meeting for item A. Did you want to declare that now?
Yes, I'd like to declare conflict of interest for item A, but I would like to vote on the remainder of the report.
Okay, thank you. So for the action items, item A, moved by Trustee Galindo, seconded by Trustee Tutt. Are there any questions or comments? Trustee Miller?
Thank you. And through the chair, I was wondering if we could get some clarification as to what the increases in projected expenses that do not have a corresponding increase in projected revenue are.
Thank you. And if we can just hold that question until we do item B, we're going to do them separately. Since Trustee Johnson has a conflict of interest for item A, we'll do that first.
Oh, sure.
Can you hang on to that one? Thank you. So just to item A only, does anyone have any questions or comments? Is that a new hand, Trustee Miller?
It is.
Okay, go ahead.
I just wanted to make, thank you, and through the chair, I just wanted to make some quick comments. One, it's extremely frustrating that we do not have more information as to where and what our GSN is going to look like. If I recall, we were in a very similar situation last year. I think, well, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think actually well into the summer, where our GSN information was just a giant question mark. So that's a very unfortunate and what I consider unacceptable position to be in terms of school board's abilities to plan and to look ahead. But I did want to just make another comment that I'm sad to see the shifts in staff. I know, as Trustee Galindo explained, that these are essentially very conservative sketches, and we're hopeful that we will need to hire back more of our staff across the board. But I'm concerned that the declining enrollment, I know, is reflective of where we are in this global pandemic, but I just wanted to make the comment that I hope that our communities continue to support public education and enrollment and participation at your local school and your local school board level is really important, because it affects our ability to receive adequate funding, and it affects our ability to retain staff long term. So I just wanted to make those comments that I understand where these numbers are at and why they need to be what they are, and I'm hopeful that they will change positively in the near future. But it's a tough situation, I think, for all school boards right now at the provincial level. Across the province. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Miller. Anything further? This is to item A only. And I'll just echo some of the comments that we just heard and recognize that when we do approve the preliminary allocation of staffing positions for school-based staffing, it does mean that we, in this case, are also declaring positions redundant in some cases. And I want to acknowledge, as we have publicly, that this is not a time when we want to be doing this. It creates uncertainty in an already very challenging time for our staff, and we want staff to know that they are valued, they're part of the HWDSB family, and we are very hopeful that as we work through the budget process, we will be able to provide positions to as many people as possible and provide that certainty as soon as possible. Hopefully we'll receive our GSN funding very soon. If there aren't any further comments on item A, is anyone opposed to approving item A from the April 8th Finance and Facilities meeting? Yeah, Trustee Miller, you've got your hand up, but I believe that's just existing.
Yes, you're correct. I apologize.
Thank you. Okay, seeing none, that passes. So on to, and that's with Trustee Johnstone declaring a conflict and not participating. For item B, which is the monitoring item for the budget development, are there any questions or comments from trustees? Okay, I'm not seeing any. I will note that, go ahead, Trustee Miller.
Sorry, I had asked a question previously around...
I apologize. You wanted to clarify...
Yes, what the projected expenses that don't have corresponding increases, if we could just get a better idea of what those are. Thank you.
Thank you. And through the director to Associate Director Zucker.
Thank you. And through the chair, I'll give two examples of expenses right now. And again, these are just our projections at the moment. When we get the GSM, we may find out different circumstances, which we're hopeful for. But one of them is our statutory benefits, or in particular CPP and OMERS. CPP is increasing the amount that the employer portion, as well as the employee portion, is changing for the majority of our staff. And it has been increasing. It was a phased-in increase over a number of years. We have not seen any changes to the benefit revenue that we're receiving from the ministry. And so our projected change for this year alone is approximately $1.3 million. So that's $1.3 million in additional statutory benefits that we're paying, that we don't have a choice in paying, whether it's CPP or OMERS, and yet we will not get any additional funding. So that would be one of them. But again, we could be pleasantly surprised through the release of the GSN. And the second one would be, again, an estimate, but we know that we're going through an RFP right now for transportation. So we have added an increase in those costs based on the fact that we know that our current contracts are lower than contracts in the surrounding areas. So our best guess was that there would be an increase. We will have the results of the RFP that come forward before we have the final budget. So again, there could be two things that happen. One, the projected increase could be lower than what we had estimated, or two, there could be a change in funding that we don't know about that happens through the GSN, and it could offset the expenses. So again, because we're being conservative right now, we're putting all of the best information that we have forward, the most conservative information that we have, and things will start to clear up as we get more information from the ministry and through our RFP process.
Thank you. Trustee Miller?
Thank you so much. Those examples are very helpful, and I hope that we get more information and more funding sooner rather than later. Thank you so much to staff for developing this.
Thank you. Is there anything further? Okay, seeing none. So to the motion to receive, or I guess approve, because it's the whole report, item B, which is a monitoring item, moved by Trustee Galindo, seconded, I'll say, by Trustee Buck. Is there anyone opposed? Seeing none, that passes. Thank you. We'll move along to item 11, which is the Policy Committee April 7th meeting. I'll turn it to Trustee Miller to bring forward the report.
Thank you. And this is the report for the Policy Committee that took place on April 7th. Staff presented minor changes for both the procurement policy and recruitment and selection policy. Just changes along, policy language, minor tweaks to make sure that our policies align with legislation from the ministry. Those two items passed with very little conversation. And I would like to bring trustees' attentions to item C, which is the Human Rights Scoping Report. The committee considered the Human Rights Scoping Report. Under the Ontario Human Rights Code, HWDSB is responsible for ensuring that learning and work environments are safe, inclusive, and free from discrimination, bias, and harassment. A human rights policy and associated procedures would serve as an anchor to related policies and further the HWDSB's commitment to a learning and work environment that is safe, inclusive, that's repetitive, sorry, safe, inclusive, and free from discrimination, bias, and harassment. We have currently a number of policies that are being developed and flushed out. For example, the Equity and Inclusion Policy 5.4, the Workplace Violence and Harassment Prevention Policy, and others, but they do not necessarily right now specifically address human rights concerns. And as a result, staff is recommending that a human rights policy being created not only as a standalone policy, but actually as a pillar policy, allowing other related HWDSB policies to be aligned with this policy and ground in the Human Rights Code. So we've captured here two of the recommendations from the external investigation, which speaks to much of this work. But essentially, the biggest highlight here is that we're hopeful that an overarching HWDSB human rights policy and associate procedures would support all members of our HWDSB community with the understanding that their human rights, their roles and responsibilities, as well as establish a process for a clear, fair, consistent, and effective mechanism to receiving and resolving complaints of code-based discrimination and harassment. So I just want to, here is the report, and I'm happy to move it today, but I wanted to make a few comments before. Associate Director Sovereign and I discussed this, and we had quite a very fulsome discussion at committee, and I want to thank Trustees Buck and Trustees Galindo for their eloquence and their input that night. But it really is the recommendation from the policy committee that human rights policy be a pillar. There's a lot of work that we are doing at a variety of our committee levels, human resources, governance. We're having a lot of these conversations. Staff is working on sewing human rights through a lot of the new policy language and the new policy action that we're looking to implement at a variety of stages through our system. And it would be hugely beneficial for the HWDSB to have the human rights policy be a pillar for essentially an umbrella for all of these other policies to flow. And we're hopeful that this work can kind of, shed a light and be a guiding light for a lot of the work that we are very committed to right now, and serve to clarify, to make sure that the work is fulsome, to make sure that the work is transparent, but also to make sure that everyone in our system, parents, staff, students, community members who participate in our schools, that we're all clear as to what these things mean, and that we're all working towards the same goal of supporting human rights within our buildings. So with that, I would like to move the report, and I'm hopeful that trustees tonight will support the establishment of a human rights pillar policy, but I also welcome the discussion from my colleagues. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Trustee Miller. So this would be a motion to approve the report. I'll have Trustee Buck as one of the committee members second that and turn it to trustees to see if there are questions or comments. Trustee Galindo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a logistical question, we'll call it. And maybe I'll turn to the committee chair for her opinion on this too. With regards to item C in the report, it's written down as on the motion of Trustee Galindo. The committee recommends. Was it Trustee Buck or myself that moved that motion? I don't actually seem to remember. I'm wondering if the chair might remember if it was. I'm leaning towards Trustee Buck, but I'm not 100% certain.
I believe you are correct, Trustee Galindo. I believe it was Trustee Buck, and I made the amendment for it to be considered a pillar policy. I apologize, Chair. I didn't mean to jump in there.
No, thank you for the correction. It was carried unanimously and is coming to us as a recommendation of the committee, but we appreciate the clarity on that and can correct the public record for it. Are there any questions or comments to the report? To trustees or student trustees? Trustee Buck?
Thank you, Madam Chair. No, just kind of wanting to capture what Trustee Miller had said about this piece, about it being a pillar policy, and just how important having human rights as the lens that we look at all of the policies that we put in place, how it's going to affect all of the students that we serve in HWDSB. So thank you so much to staff for the hard work that they put into this, into crafting the language of the item that they brought forward to us the other week. Many man hours, I'm sure, went into it. And so just thank you so much for the sensitivity and the care and compassion that they had for the students and the staff that we serve.
Thank you. Are there any further questions or comments? I will just add myself to the speakers list. I did have a question about, as I always like to ask, about assessment. Now, and it's just a question to understand, in particular for procurement, we have a way that interim financial statements come forward and are audited. So that's one way to monitor that we're meeting the intended outcomes. But for some of the items on 11A-4, I'll just turn to staff for a response if possible. I'm wondering how trustees are able to monitor, or is that more of an operational monitoring for example, appropriate application of the procurement policy, making sure purchases are within budget, and that procurement processes are managed consistently, and we provide feedback to suppliers. Those are some of the assessment pieces. Where would that be reported, and would trustees see that, or would that all go through audit perhaps? And I'll go to the director to see if there's someone that could answer that.
So thank you through the chair. I'll ask Associate Director Stacey Zucker to provide some insights on this area.
Thank you, Associate Director Zucker.
Thank you, and through the chair. So some of those will be operational in nature, and the monitoring will happen either through the system. So because there's a policy in place, and we do have a system which allows us to put those checks and balances electronically in place, then it would be monitored that way and through reporting. If trustees were to ask for a report to come back, then it would likely be through audit. You're correct. But again, once it's in place, the monitoring will happen, is mostly operational.
Thank you. And I guess for the same item on the second policy that we have before us on page 11B-3, which is our recruitment and selection policy, it looks like a lot of those assessment items fall under the implementation of the HWDSB Equity Action Plan and Workplace Equity Action Plan. Would we receive updates, for example, about, about interview practices or some of the things that have been implemented through the reports about the Equity Action Plan to the director?
Thank you. Through the chair, before I pass on to Superintendent Jamie Nunn for an update, the equity hiring audit that we did, I know there are reports that do go to the Human Resources Committee for updates, but I'll pass over to Superintendent Jamie Nunn in terms of what is the level of information we provide on the recommendations and that were provided by the Tanner Turner. So through Superintendent Nunn.
Thank you. And just to maybe clarify, it's with respect to how we monitor that we're meeting the intended outcomes of our policy, our recruitment and selection policy, to Superintendent Nunn.
Thank you, and through the chair, we will include that as part of our updates in regards to the implementation of the various recommendations of the Employment Equity Audit. And those updates will come to the Human Resources Committee. The next update will be in June. And then again throughout 2021, 2022, when we update the board, the HR committee, on our implementation.
Thank you. And just a last comment, I certainly support the human rights scoping report and the intent of building a human rights pillar policy, and just appreciate that this also aligns with some of the recommendations that came forward through the third-party investigation, and that's aligned with a lot of important work that we're currently engaged in. So thank you to the committee members and to staff for the work they've done so far. I don't see anyone else on the speakers list, so at this time, if there isn't anything further, is anyone opposed to approving the report? Seeing none, that's approved. We'll move next to item 12, which is our program committee report from April 6th. I'll turn to Trustee Buck to bring that forward.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So program met back on April 6th. We had a Safe Schools Action Plan monitoring item come to us, as well as a 21st Century Learning update. Just some highlights from that. Staff presented the report on Safe Schools, highlighting that the recommendation and action steps within the panel's report align with the positive culture and well-being focus in the board annual plan. It was shared that we must have places where everyone belongs and everyone achieves. In the report, it states that our board is committed to responding to the voices of students, parents, guardians, caregivers, staff, and community as shared within the report. So what this means is that we have a relentless focus on building positive and inclusive cultures in all classrooms and schools. So a place where everybody belongs, everyone is safe, and everyone can achieve. As well as creating learning environments where student identity and voice are centered. So students' lived experiences are honored and an essential part of learning. Also listed here is relationships are positive, supportive, caring, and kind. Creating structures to gather, listen, and respond to student voice. And that student voice, and this is paramount, student voice must inform school and board plans. Another paramount piece would be that is around safety and incidents of bullying being addressed with active involvement of students themselves as well as their families. This includes the student who experiences bullying, the student who displays the bullying behavior, and the student who witnesses bullying. So all those impacted by the incidents of bullying would be part of that process. Staff walked trustees through the board annual plan, noting that there is a three-phase approach, and the immediate action plan recommendations will be addressed in phase 1, and some will be addressed in phase 1 as well as in phase 2. You'll see listed there the timelines for each of those phases. Staff shared that they will be working on these listed immediate actions first, so reflect upon findings and recommendations and share them widely. Create lead staff positions for those changes, coordinate efforts, meaning they'd align with other student well-being initiatives and work, including our equity action plan and mental health strategy. Make a commitment, develop a commitment statement, establish core organizational values, establish timelines, and clear measurable outcomes. Ensure specialized supports for students affected by bullying. Increase supervision outside of the classroom. This will mean coming up with creative solutions. Collect and widely report school-level data on bullying. Design and distribute bullying awareness materials. Form a high-level steering committee with wide representation to oversee implementation. Develop a community-led independent committee to advise on implementation at the highest level. It was noted that regular updates will be coming to trustees. Next, we had the 21st Century Learning Update, specifically regarding remote learning. It was noted that remote learning is broken down into 3 parts. First being the 2020-21 Remote Learning Update, the learning from remote learning in 2020-21. So that means learning from what we've learned from over the last year. In the first year of the pandemic, and then planning for the coming school year. There was discussion of the device strategy and having equity of access. One-to-one devices were provided to secondary students, and device kits were provided to students in grades 4 to 8. The board did have a good number of devices to draw from. At the beginning of the pandemic, this was pivotal for our board, and we were really ahead of the game in terms of making sure that all of our students had access to a device when we were able to begin remote learning. Staff had to decide on a standard learning platform. There was some trial and error. Folks will remember back in the start of the pandemic, multiple platforms were used in some regards, and feedback was consistent from all stakeholders that having those consistent standardized learning platforms, the Hub and MS Teams, were essential. In March of this year, a parent survey was conducted with 2,400 respondents, and it was learned that a good number of families would like to have remote learning continue. Staff shared that they will have consistency of platforms. However, connectedness does pose some challenges. So in planning for next year, staff are considering a change in model for our elementary remote learning and are considering a dual track model where students participate both in person and remotely. So support for students will be provided by staff at the school, and students will have opportunities of connecting with fellow students on excursions and student assemblies. Secondary school will have e-learning. In answer to a question, staff shared that trustees will be updated as more details are received about independent learning versus our options of remote and e-learning. The dual model would not require separate funding, as this model would allow us to have staff and students in schools while learning remotely. Currently, one transition period does exist in the dual model. However, there can always be flexibility due to extenuating circumstances, as we've learned throughout the course of the last year and a bit. During this portion of our discussion, Trustee Johnstone, who is not a member trustee of the committee, she joined us that evening. She suggested that trustees write a letter to, by the chair to public health, noting that in the absence of more aggressive and proactive public health leadership from the province, it is the responsibility of our local health unit to determine if COVID-19 conditions should warrant the closing or opening of Hamilton schools. It is our responsibility, HWDSB's responsibility, to act on determinations made by Hamilton Public Health to ensure the safety and well-being of all students and staff. And in the spirit of transparency and accountability, request that HPH provide formal written correspondence regarding what conditions would prompt them to enact Section 22 of the Health Protection and Promotion Act and close our buildings. Further, that HPH provides specific details on how frontline education workers receive the vaccination and if this will factor into the decision to close or open schools. I believe the chair of the board has reached out to all trustees regarding this request, as it was unanimous around the table that a letter should go out to Hamilton Public Health. Additional sentiments from committee members also highlighted concerns about school closures, and that trustees were concerned about whether another move to remote learning would mean what it would mean for the mental and physical health of our students. So the hope was that HPH, along with the province, would opt for other measures. Obviously, this meeting took place a little while ago, so we are in a different context and now dealing with things as they are. It was also requested the chair articulate the same concerns and questions to the Government of Ontario, the Minister of Education, and Ontario's Chief Medical Officer of Health. There was unanimous consent, as I stated, regarding this request to have the chair send a letter. We also had a student learning and achievement update. So staff updated trustees on the progress report for semester 2, the interim report. So consistent with semester 1, when students had difficulty at the beginning of the semester, but progressed well by the end of the semester. This is often related to attendance issues or handing in assignments late. Parents and guardians are contacted and a plan is put in place to support the student in moving forward in a positive direction. Staff outline the student success supports that are in place. Secondary teachers are making the adjustments to courses to support students in being successful. It was also noted that social work referrals were high in the fall, however, they have now leveled off. Further updates will be coming to trustees in June, and I hope you would take the opportunity to join us. And with that, I would submit the report.
Thank you, Trustee Buck. So moving to receive the report is Trustee Buck. I'll have Trustee Deeth second that. Are there any questions or comments from trustees? Or student trustees, of course. Student Trustee Hessler.
Yeah, thank you, Anne, through the chair. I had a question about the 21st century learning plan that was kind of discussed a little bit. I feel like in the move to online learning, and especially the fact that it's full online learning, it's very unfortunate, but I think that there's an opportunity here to really experiment with later start times to schools. I feel like that's an aspect that people talk a lot about for 21st century learning. However, it's never really something that's really implemented. I feel like at the current moment, it's a good opportunity to perhaps collect some data on it. And as well, I feel like it would kind of ease the mental health issues that youth are experiencing at the time. Has the committee kind of looked into this as a possibility, or? I'm not sure what steps have been taken.
Thank you for the question. I'll turn to the director to start and refer to the appropriate staff.
Thank you. Through the chair, to the student trustees question. In terms of when we do pivot to remote, one of our guiding principles is to try to maintain the same bell times and school schedule. Just seeking clarity, is student trustee meaning in the current situation when we move to remote to consider a later start when we do have to pivot, or is it about sort of a longer term piece, regardless whether we're in remote or in person, to have a later start time for secondary? I guess that's my clarifying question at this point. Through the chair.
Thank you. Student trustee Hessler, do you want to clarify that further?
Yeah, my question was kind of more specific to the current moment right now. I felt it was a good opportunity to collect data that might be used later in the future. But for now, it was more specific to this moment.
And student trustee Hessler, just to clarify a little bit further, do you mean that make the shift to a later start time and then collect data on the outcomes of that shift in time?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. To the director?
So thank you for the clarification. So before I pass to Associate Director Peter Sovereign, at this point, we haven't considered that. We were trying to align the same bell times for students and also for staff for consistency, especially as we know that trying to maintain schedules that some students or staff at times have other commitments scheduled either in the morning with responsibilities for their children, or students who may have other opportunities or other jobs, so they're looking for consistency. That's been our thinking in maintaining the consistency, but I'll pass over to Associate Director Peter Sovereign for any further insights he may have.
Thank you, Director. And through the chair, I'll just echo the director's comments, but thank the student trustee for the suggestion. I do think that, as the director has indicated, due to the scheduling for students, for families, and staff, adhering to the current bell times is something that we feel we should maintain. But your suggestion, student trustee, is an excellent one and something we will definitely consider as we look further at our remote learning options.
Thank you. Student trustee Hessler?
Thank you. Yeah, no more questions or comments.
Thank you. And I don't believe I see anyone else on the speakers list. Thank you for the report. I know we had a fulsome discussion at the committee level. I'll just provide trustees an update that with the change in direction from the Ministry of Education regarding remote learning, the letter will be going out, but is in draft form because I needed to shift some of the questioning so that it fits our current context, but that will be going out this week. So with that, to the motion to receive the report, is anyone opposed? Seeing none, we'll move along to reports from legislated committees. Item 13 is our Special Education Advisory Committee from March 31st. Trustee Dees?
Thank you, through the chair. So actually, first of all, I'd like to note that at the top, meeting date should read April 19th. 2021, I believe, so maybe we just need to make that correction for this. There is, as you'll note, the first item is an action item, which really aligns with some of the previous discussions we've been having in regards to supporting students in regards to remote learning or online learning supports. If you look further down in the package, you will see the letter from the Durham District School Board. I believe we also received another one from another board, and much of the concerns that have already been discussed did come up at SEAC, talking about that they are concerned about the equity of remote learning and making sure that we do have the supports in place for this. So on the motion, I'm just wondering that they are asking us, the Board of Trustees, to write a letter to the Ministry of Education supporting this letter. So I'll just leave it at that. I don't know whether this should be a separate letter or to be combined with the letter that we've already approved sending. So we'll just follow up with that one. And after following that, there are a couple of information items, and that was at the meeting we had greetings from our chair, which Don Danko, and we also had our director give an overview of the positive culture and well-being and student learning and achievement goals. And Denise Dawson, as always, gave a wonderful overview of the budget process. And other than that, we had some members updates and a superintendent update in regards to funding from the Ministry of Education to offer summer learning opportunities, which is always great. And Education Community Partnership Program has closed. And then finally, brief overview of the regulatory requirements for SEAC was presented. And with that, I will move the report.
Thank you, Trustee Dees. So if we move to approve the report, then we would be supporting trustees sending a letter to the Minister of Education, supporting the letter that's enclosed. I'm going to suggest that we move to receive the report, and then we can talk about whether the letter as part of this discussion fits with the letter regarding remote learning. I think they do align closely and could be combined. So with a motion to receive the report, moved by Trustee Dees, seconded by Trustee Johnstone, are there questions or comments? So I'll just build on my initial comment. Some of the information in the letter from Durham District School Board has to do with universal design for learning and accessibility when we provide remote and online learning resources. So I think that given the intent of the letter that we discussed earlier and approved is to highlight concerns around the impacts of remote learning, the concerns around the proposal for permanent remote learning, timelines and such. I believe that we can also highlight that where we do have online learning, that UDL or Universal Design for Learning and accessibility should be integrated, and that resources for students requiring special education supports need to be considered as we roll out any kind of a plan for remote learning. So if trustees are supportive of that, I think we could combine the two letters, but if there's different direction, I'm happy to hear that as well. Trustee Dees?
So I think that as long as we in the letter that we sent, because it's very specific. If you read through the letter from Durham, and I know SEAC obviously feels strongly about this to make sure that these issues are addressed. So like I said, I think as long as we include the specifics that the Durham letter got into to make the case for making sure that remote and online learning is equitable, then I don't see an issue with combining the letters.
Thank you, and perhaps when I take that away, I can operationalize it. I'm using air quotes that you can't see, and depending on how it seems to work, I can either do two separate letters or combine them however works best, if that's okay with trustees. Trustee Bingham?
I thought Trustee Johnstone was ahead of me on that one. I'm sorry. One of my concerns, either way, an individual letter or a combined letter, is that I don't want to see this letter, this opportunity to step forward very strongly. I don't want it to get lost. So many letters being written. How is it going to be able to be very strong in its manner? Because I support it 110%. If it's combined, how do we make sure that one area is not written differently, so that the letter for SEAC is lost somewhere in a letter? I just get very concerned over the fact that special needs usually end up lost somewhere. They don't. It's not as strong as everything else that's going on, and it's not as heard in many areas. And we need to really step forward and make a strength, an absolute strength, that the ministry is hearing us. The ministry is realizing very strongly that our students with disabilities are not having the same opportunities that they actually should be having. We're doing the best we can, and I love in the report to be able to see the summer programs where possible as well. Like, that needs to be strengthened, but I just don't want the strength of this to be lost somewhere. So I guess I'm asking if there's a way of being able to make sure that that it's very strongly written one way or the other, so that it isn't lost somewhere. Thank you.
Thank you. And so I think I'm hearing that 2 separate letters sent separately would probably strengthen the message and clear it up. I know Trustee Deeth, you have your hand up, but I'm going to go to Trustee Johnstone first. I missed her hand, and then I'll come back to you. Trustee Johnstone.
Thanks so much. Through the chair. So echoing comments that we just heard, I think that if it is included in the main letter, which I do not have a problem with, but it does need to be its own section in its entirety. And I would say, just given prominence within that letter, I think that when we're looking at online learning and when we're looking at even all of the back and forth transitions between remote and in class, it has had a tremendous impact on our special education students. And when we're looking at the ability to offer online courses and remote learning, I think part of what we've heard previously, so previously before COVID, when the government was negotiating online courses, especially for our secondary students, they kept putting out there the idea that a student could ask for an exemption. So you might be required, or students would be required to have 2 courses online, but there would be exemptions. And I guess my question to that is, where's the equity in that? Where is our students, and if we're saying that everyone's entitled to a certain standard of education, how does that make families feel? How does that make students feel if they're being told, well, you might not be able to handle this course online, so rather than offering you additional supports and services, instead we're going to say that you can be exempt? I kind of feel like whatever platform we are offering education, it needs to be in a way that is fully funded so that it can be fully accessible. And I think that needs to be the message, that exemptions are, they can, it shouldn't, that shouldn't be the government's plan A. It should always be, how are we looking to make education in whatever platform it's being offered to be accessible to all students. And I think part of that too is when we're looking at, part of that question too is on funding. So if we are going to say that our online courses and remote learning is truly offered to all students, there is additional dollars that is required in order to make it truly accessible and in order to offer those supports in place. And a lot of times that means one-to-one support. That means lower class sizes. That means whether it's online or in person. I think that the funding also very much needs to be a part of that conversation so that we're ensuring that that if we want a program to be successful, then you have to fund it for success. It's not okay to tell a student, well, it's accessible to students who have a certain skill set and ability. But I guess it goes to the whole idea that education should meet the needs of students, not the other way around. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Johnstone. Trustee Dees?
Thank you, through the chair. And sort of building on what Trustee Johnson said is absolutely, and I think to me, this is the biggest argument against launching this in this September, because if it isn't well thought out and that they haven't considered all students, that this is equitable, then it shouldn't be launched, right? Our special needs or special education students should not be having to play catch up. So unless it can be launched in full, fully accessible to all students with the proper funding, as Trustee Johnson stated, then it shouldn't be launched. And so I really believe that this is, like I said, I think, the most important argument there is to waiting for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Dees. Is there anything further from trustees or student trustees? And I'm just scrolling to make sure I haven't missed anybody. Trustee Miller, did I get you?
No, you didn't. I just had one quick comment, if I could. Just wanted to echo Trustee Bingham's comments. I think it's really important, and Trustee Deeth has just highlighted in her last comments here, that there are so many reasons that sort of bulldozing this plan through for September 2021, if that's how it is intended, there are so many different areas where this could really turn out to be problematic, and absolutely 100% our special needs and special education students should not be in a position where they're playing catch up, should not be in a position where they're sort of, the last ones remembered. However, I do think it's really important. So how do we advocate for the whole system, but also really highlight the very specific concerns and the comments and the questions coming out of this committee? How do we do that in a way that is forceful, that is giving it the importance and the push that it deserves? So I just wanted to echo that. I think Trustee Bingham said it very eloquently earlier tonight, but I'm also concerned about that, and I do think they do need to be separate letters as far as I'm concerned. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Mulholland?
Yeah, through the chair, I believe that the committee should put down their priorities and their concerns, because they know what they are. We as a board really don't know, and they should compose their own letter, send it to the board. That's the process, and ask a request that the board forward it on to the ministry. We make a motion, and on it goes. I don't understand why we're trying to write letters for committees that know much more about the concerns that we do. So that should be the process. Thank you, through the chair.
Thank you, Trustee Mulholland. I think we could certainly seek feedback from from SEAC, but they do have a letter that basically outlines what they're looking for us to capture about online learning supports and universal design for learning as well. So perhaps I can use that as an opportunity to connect with SEAC for further input as well. Is there anything further? So I believe I've heard, sorry, Trustee Mulholland, go ahead. Trustee Mulholland, did you want to speak again? Okay, so I believe it's clear that I would be writing a separate letter for this, so we can have a motion to approve the report, including the action item to write a letter, but that would be in collaboration with SEAC. And I can always encourage them to also send their own letter. Moved by Trustee D, seconded by Trustee Johnstone. Is anyone opposed? Seeing none, that passes. Thank you, everyone. Item 14 is report from the Committee of the Whole private session held earlier this evening. I'll turn to Vice Chair Galindo to bring forward that report.
Thank you. Through the chair, I am bringing forward the following recommendation from tonight's Committee of the Whole, that the Audit Committee report from March 25th, 2021 be approved, including that KPMG be retained as the external auditors for HWDSB for the 2021-2022 school year. And second, that the Finance and Facilities Committee report from April 8th, 2021 be received. And I move that back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So that report is moved to be received by Trustee Galindo, seconded by Trustee Bingham. Are there any questions or comments? Seeing none, is anyone opposed to receiving the report from Committee of the Whole? Seeing none, that passes. Thank you. Next is item 15, oral reports from liaison committees. Item A is the City School Board Liaison Committee. We have not met and we do not have a future date, but I hope that that is something that we can arrange soon, so I don't have anything to report. Item B is the Hamilton Wentworth Home and School Association. Vice Chair Galindo, is there anything to report?
Thank you. Through the chair, not too much to report. I know that the Ontario Federation hosted a paint night last month, which I assume was a success. Good timing too, prior to the lockdown, I would assume, but it was probably a digital component. And that due to conflicting schedules, and I think a lot of the changes that we saw earlier this month's meeting was postponed, but I don't have any further updates on that topic. Back to you.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay, I'll move along. Item C is the Hamilton Foundation for Student Success. Trustee Buck.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So unfortunately, we were not able to meet this month. Too many conflicting schedules and whatnot. So not really an update for this month. I do want to mention that I'd forgotten to mention something the month before, so last month, regarding the prom project, and that regrettably has been canceled for this school year. It's old news at this point for everyone, but just wanting to make sure that that got captured. Anyways, yeah, no new news from the foundation.
Thank you. And our item D is the Ontario Public School Board Association. Trustee Johnstone.
Thank you, through the chair. So I have a number of updates. The last legislative update I received through OPSPA was actually April 1st. So some of this is a bit dated. So for example, the minister has now announced a move for all schools across Ontario to move into remote learning with an indefinite timeline. At the time of the report, so this would have been April 1st, there was 248 cases across Ontario. And I just checked up online as of today, it was 4,250. So you can see cases have gone up quite substantially since April 1st when this report was put together. Back on April 1st at the time of those cases, there was an impact of 2,057 students, 424 staff, and 63 of the 4,828 schools were closed. Just a reminder that OPSPA's speaker series is continuing on Thursdays. They have a variety of topics, so I encourage trustees to participate in that. We have a board of directors meeting this upcoming Saturday, and there will be a number of items discussed in there, including the province's proposal for remote learning, as well as a review of, it's actually timely to some of tonight's discussions, but we'll also be receiving an update with regards, or information with regards to TDSB's Integrity Commissioner. And within that report, they talk about the complaints process, the Integrity Commissioner's annual public reporting process, the provision of advice and recommendations to trustees, and the provision of education to trustees. Also, to be discussed this Saturday will be the provincial budget. It is expected that the education sector will see an increase of 2.3%. So that moves education sector funding up from $30.6 billion to $33.7 billion. We're also expected to see a funding announcement for priorities and partnerships. Also this Saturday, included in some of the reports is a report from the Indigenous Trustees Council. Vast majority of trustees who sit on this council have participated in several of the minister's education stakeholder consultations. And in those consultations, they've raised concerns about finding competent and qualified Indigenous language leaders who are able to speak the language fluently, as well as growing concerns around the gaps for children learning on First Nations and not being able to attend in-class or in-person learning, as well as access to technology, connectivity, and remote learning. They also have raised concerns with regards to de-streaming, or not concerns, but thoughts on with the matter of de-streaming, and spoke about the importance of strategic and appropriate staffing so as to ensure that First Nation students, like all racialized students, will be successful, and the intention of de-streaming will be successful. With regards to some of the legislation that's coming through, there is Bill 254, Protecting Ontario Education Ontario Elections Act. It's in its third reading, and part of the amendments to the Ontario Elections Act is donation limits, longer advance polling, and independent MPPs will be able to receive per vote subsidies. Bill 251 is combating human trafficking. This act is in its second reading, and it's about developing a policy with regards to combating human trafficking. I know I spoke about this previously. There was also amendments filed with regards to childcare. Those amendments include allowing authorized rec programs the ability to operate more than 3 hours a day. So authorized rec programs would be places like YMCA, Boys and Girls Club, and Indigenous Friendship Centers. There was amendments made to the school year calendars that allowed March break to move from March to April, which of course the break just concluded. And also OPSPA has been speaking quite vocally with regards to the government's online learning / TBO announcement, including public statements, media interviews, a formal statement and letter to the Minister of Education. And that, Madam Chair, concludes my report.
Thank you, Trustee Johnstone. Are there any questions? Seeing none. At this time, I'll move to item 16, which is I'll need a motion to adjourn and move into standing committee. So I'll have that moved by Trustee Bingham, seconded by Trustee Tutt, and we'll just take a few minutes to shift over the recording to a new recording. So stay on Teams where you are. You can take a 3-minute stretch break, and then we'll restart at 8:23.